Hello, thanks for dropping into Time in the Studio. This is a nourishing space for multi-passionate, earth-loving creatives who want to dig in and flourish. I'm Sarah Marie Miller, a multimedia artist, clinical herbalist, and postpartum doula, living on the native land of the Arapaho, Ute, Cheyenne, Comanche, and Sioux peoples, currently called Boulder, Colorado. I think you're going to really love this chat with Elaine Su-Hui. We discussed the concerns of death during the time of COVID. Oh, that's another thing. This was recorded about a year ago and is just now being released. So some things have changed, and strangely many things remain the same a year later. We get into the power of community and meditation, death and mourning, and how to collaborate with others in a way that allows people to process and transform their inner terrain. I really loved her bio on her website. I'm just going to read a little bit from that. Elaine Su-Hui is an artist, facilitator, and Dharma practitioner. Her work aims to be a direct expression of her Dharma practice, investigating our relationship to change, impermanence, receptivity, and emptiness through teachings from nature. Trained as a printmaker, Elaine also makes her own watercolors from respectfully foraged natural pigments. She's also the founder and artistic director of Inner Fields, New York, an intimate social practice project aimed at breaking down hierarchical and commodity-based forms of interaction, while building a culture of generosity and ecological wisdom. The project is now a collectivized organization of 6 artists, writers, scholars, and educators, and is hosted in various unique sites across the United States. Deeply influenced by her time living and working in Oakland, California in 2009, followed by 10 years living and working in New York, Elaine's artistic praxis is fiercely oriented around a grassroots approach, building small, collaborative communities and liberating one's creativity from a reputation economy are core tenets to her ethos of art as a process of care and service. Whether she's investing in long-term collaborative relationships or slow material processes made by hand, Elaine prioritizes depth of connection as her primary marker of cultural impact. I just really love that and can see how relationship is at the core of her work, and how in this conversation I just could feel just how nourishing that is to approach life in just looking at our relationships and really focusing on making them deeper and richer, and looking at the way we connect with water, with land, with people, with animals, with plants. Just all of it. It's just really fun. Okay. Let's get into it. Here we go. Cha, cha, cha. I am so honored and excited to have on the podcast today Elaine Su-Hui of Inner Fields. And she is an incredible artist working with materials of the earth and working in a very thoughtful, meditative way, and merging art, consciousness, community, and just so much richness and beauty and thoughtfulness and meaning into everything that she does. Elaine, thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks for having me.
Let's start in present time. Where are you and what's brought you there?
Okay, yeah. So I am in what is known as Sydney, Australia, Gadigal country of the Eora Nation. And I was born and grew up here, but I haven't lived here in over 15 years. So I came out here a couple of years ago very suddenly because my dad got sick, and then basically spent like over a year helping care for him. And he passed away in September 2019. And then as I was preparing to come back to the US, the pandemic hit basically, and the borders closed. So I'm still out here.
What a journey. I'm sorry for your loss. And I'm interested in tending to people towards the end of their life.
I think it's such a privilege to be able to do that with someone and like accompany them in their dying process. or even accompanying someone through like a very serious debilitating illness.
Yeah.
I mean, it's really hard. It's obviously extremely stressful, especially if it's like your own family member. But there's also just a lot of beauty in that process. And for me, I felt like I was such a privileged that I could come out here and do that, and that my lifestyle was set up in such a way that I can kind of work anywhere. It was funny because leading up to the 2 years prior to that, I'd really put all these structures in place to make my studio as sort of transportable as possible. Yeah, I feel like that really kind of served me in that moment where I was like, look, I'll just pack it up and take it all to Australia and be with my dad at that time. I mean, it's obviously for me, it's like changed me completely. And, you know, I think maybe I'm slightly unusual because death is something that I've thought about a lot. And I've been, like, since I was a kid, been very curious about the dying process. So for me, I was, you know, amongst like the fear and the deep stress, there was like a lot of curiosity, and it's like the most normal human thing. And yet it's something Western culture hides from us. And just like birth, I guess, they hide that from us too, less so than death. But it's a really profound process to watch someone go through that time. And for everyone, it's different. Obviously, you can't make any conclusive statements about it. And people go in all kinds of ways. Yeah. But yeah, I still feel like what a privilege that was. Like there's a lot of death doula work at the moment, and we didn't have a death doula, but when I learned about that, I was like, that would have been amazing. I think there is a real need for it, because having some kind of guidance or assistance at that time that isn't medical, it's just such an tidal wave of emotion and so on.
That must have been so healing for him to have you there. And because I feel like, especially in this time of COVID, so many people are passing and not able to have anyone with them, which just seems so horrific and terrible to be all alone. Like, I just think to have someone hold space for the container of whatever comes up for you and to witness that passing. Like I've been with all three of my grandparents that have passed, and it was so incredible to have that. It is it's like an honor, and it's just this mysterious moment that's also so universal. It's something I want to understand more about too. So I'm glad you were able to have that moment with him.
Yeah, that's right. And I, you know, I really do feel for everybody in this past year there's been so much loss on so many levels, and a lot of death. I think death has become like normalized into our culture in this past year. And yeah, I really mourn for all those people that didn't get to be there physically in person. I know that a lot of medical staff and nurses were helping people like accompany their family members via technology and FaceTime and all that. When my dad got sick, death was like very heavily on my mind. It'd gone from being like sort of a philosophical thing that I was interested in to like a lived, embodied thing. I feel like in the last year, so many people have been more open to talk about death and loss and grief and the depths of this kind of suffering. And I think there's something, kind of beautiful about that people, I mean, it's not beautiful to be forced into that, but it is beautiful that like it's human. And yeah, I've had so many conversations with strangers lately that have just, where we can talk about these things and just humanize them and normalize them. And yeah, I don't know, there's something unifying about that.
I can feel that. Yeah. I'm curious, I know you have like a very strong meditation practice. I'm curious how that began and how that served you through the last couple of years. There's just so much change and uncertainty, and I can see how meditation may be beneficial through those times.
Yeah, so that's a really interesting question because I have been I guess, very serious student and serious meditator. And for probably about the best part of 5 or 6 years. But so not that long, actually. But I was like very seriously practicing, particularly from like about 2013 to till now. But I'm hesitating saying this because actually when my dad got sick, I actually stopped practicing. And I didn't stop altogether straight away because my daily practice had been strong up until that point, but I noticed it starting to like wither away. I mean, firstly, your schedule's not your own when you're taking care of someone. And there's just sort of a sense of risk all the time. Like there would be sudden things that came up and we'd have to rush to hospital, or, you know, there was like a lot of things that come up that you just can't really devote the amount of time that I was devoting to practice before, like formal sitting practice before. And then also the agitation of my own mind became more and more accelerated as Dad's illness accelerated. And of course, like family dynamics, I haven't lived with my family for a really long time. And I was like, now we're all living together in this really intense way. So I actually stopped practicing. And pretty much throughout the pandemic, I was in like a very intense grieving process. So my dad died just before the pandemic. But yeah, pretty much that all of 2020 was this just kind of getting scoured out by like intense grief and struggle on multiple levels, like not just grief for my dad, but kind of the loss of like all of my normal life. Again, I'm not the only one that was feeling this. I also struggled to practice. I actually turned my back on it and I just put it aside. And I spoke to my meditation teacher and she said that's perfectly normal that would be happening, and practice happens in all different ways. It's not just this formal sitting on the cushion and being very still. I feel like I still practiced for the last 2 years, but it hasn't been a formal sitting practice. It's been much more about relationship, being in a relational field, particularly with your family member. I've been saying, living with my mum for 2 years is like, if you ever want some serious spiritual retreat, spiritual practice time, like just go live with a family member. Yes, particularly if it's a parent. And just exploring other things like physical movement, somatic practices, just other forms of like inner work, basically, that are just supportive during a time of like immense tumult and distress. And so, actually, like, it's true. Meditation really did help me, but it helped me because I think I'd done the practice during the period before that allowed me to have like enough awareness to also recognize like what I needed in the time of great stress and like drastic change, and actually to not hold on to the dogma of meditation. Like I must still sit every day. It's like, no, what's supportive to you right now? What's actually like kind? And that's the whole point. It's not meant to be like a militaristic style thing, which I think says a lot about the way in the West we latch on to meditation. Like, I must meditate, I must do yoga, I must eat more vegetables. Like all these things just become stuff we got to do to be productive or to be our best selves, and this whole self-improvement trip. And I mean, it's all like acts of commodification, really. And
that's such a great reminder, because I can fall into that trap too of just thinking, oh, I need to do this every day. Maybe check in with yourself every day and see what you need.
Yeah, and just like broaden your practice. Like if you just because you practice every day doesn't necessarily mean it has to express itself in the world. Actually, that's the more important part. Like sitting on a cushion, focusing on your breath or whatever your practice is, that's fine and good. But the whole point is to be in the world and bring it into action. So that is the heart of the practice, like doing that in person in each moment and trying to be as skillful as you can. And, you know, I think it's really hard to like be compassionate or be loving towards yourself. Again, that's something I don't think our culture is set up. It's not set up for us to be that way. It's set up for us to feel a sense of lack all the time and insecurity. So that can be really hard too. You can feel like a sense of failure when you don't love yourself and you don't feel self-compassion or even compassion to other people. I've actually been like in a lot of rage this last year. And so, you know, my practice has been like, that's okay too. You're welcome. You're welcome to be here. You don't have to be this, like that is the soft part, being soft and welcoming to all the parts, not just the, you know, the one that's like calm and happy and easygoing and that gets along with people. So these are all things I'm still learning. Yeah. And yeah, talk to me in 5 years and see.
Oh, yeah, I love that. It's so helpful for me to hear, and I imagine that'll be helpful for other people to hear, because it's just been such a year of complex experiences and feelings and emotions, and not always knowing what to do with those feelings. So I think just to find some acceptance for those parts that are very hard to accept, and even accepting the non-accepting that shows up. But I think I had never named that before.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you know, I think when people are drawn to meditation or yoga or other sort of contemplative practices, they are kind of trying to align themselves with a sense of positivity and like light, like going towards some kind of light. And the shadow part often does get left out, and that's seen as the thing you're supposed to grow out of, or that's the part you're leaving behind. And I have definitely done that for years, like never looked at my shadow side. And actually it's been really like an act of domination against myself to like push that actually very, very soft, squishy part of myself out of the way, because it's unpleasant and ugly and doesn't fit what my ego identity feels like it should be. And you know, and it's complicated because in some ways there's a health part to pushing it aside. Like it's not good to be, you know, angry all the time or impatient all the time. And so there is like a health part to go, no, I want to like develop other habits and other tendencies, but to never like look at that stuff and to never like allow it a seat at your table, or, you know, the way my meditation teacher says it is to like sit down beside it and just hold its hand. And, you know, it's to include it like that, that softness. I still struggle with it. It's so like kind of like a mantra that I've been using for myself for the last year is like shadow states are part of nature too. Like if nature is inclusive, if you include all things in nature, then even like destruction and rage and chaos and, you know, these are part of nature too. All of these things are included, and they have their place and they serve a purpose. And it's when they're like unchecked or like unconscious, that's when they wreak the most havoc and cause greater harm. And actually when you let them sit at your table, or just see them as they arise and like at least hold their hand for a moment, like as intolerable as that sometimes feels, like that changes them. Like they're like little beings that want to be heard and seen. I'm no psychotherapist, but these are some things that I'm like exploring right now in my practice.
Oh, I love
Yeah.
that. That's so beautiful and profound. I'm curious, who is your teacher and how did you find them? How are you drawn towards the path of meditation to begin with?
Yes. So I have many teachers, and sometimes I'll just say my teacher and I'll be referring to different teachers.
Yeah.
But the teacher that I've been referring to, like so far in this conversation, is Gina Sharp,
Mm.
who she was like the guiding teacher of New York Insight. And I haven't spoken to her in quite a long time, actually. But yeah, I mean, I was just, she was one of my first meditation teachers, she and Sebene Selassie. I think without them, I probably wouldn't have taken on the practice as inspired as I did at the beginning. I mean, for years, my friends had been telling me to meditate or try meditation or yoga. And I was like super resistant. I'm resistant to anyone telling me what to do. And
Yeah.
I just also was like I have like a lot of like buzzy, impatient energy, and I'm always doing. I'm like doing like hummingbird energy, like buzzing around doing 100 things at once. And it actually was like very confronting for me to think about sitting down and doing nothing, even for 5 minutes or 10 minutes. Like the discomfort was so extreme. And yeah, I think it was a spontaneous decision one night, actually. Like a friend of mine had been inviting me to come to like a people of color meditation sit. And I was like, I don't want to meditate. I don't want to meditate. And then one day I think I just had nothing to do or something, or I'd been on my mind enough that she'd said it enough times that I was like, okay, let me come with you tonight. And thankfully, the two teachers that were there were Sebene and Gina. And they I mean, I just was so impressed by like how much they inhabited their bodies, how settled they were. And I just was like, yeah, I have never felt like that ever. And so, and also they're like articulate and beautifully spoken, and they're just so inspiring the way that they teach, and they make it so accessible and human and community based and relational. And so, yeah, I mean, I think like a lot of meditators, like you kind of start and then you kind of just go with it, and you see the benefits of it so quickly. And and you see the difficulty of it too, which in some ways like helps drive me, because I'm a little bit of like, I have a little bit of that energy. Like if I'm pushing up against a wall, like somehow that makes me more determined somehow. So I was just very serious about it from that moment on. And
I'm curious also about your work with inner fields, because that seems to merge like this idea of community, creating a gallery space in your home of like performance and meditation and allowing people to come into your space. I'm curious how that started and what that process was like.
Yeah, so Innerfield started because actually it came from a place of like deep disillusionment with what I was making as an artist and what the role of the artist was in society, what I felt it could be or should be, and what I felt like my particular role at that time wasn't. I had been following a pretty like, what's the word? Not traditional, but conventional sort of approach to being a working artist. And I had had some successes with that, like really good successes. And there is kind of a formula to it now, because being an artist is a profession, and it's an amazing time to be one because it's more accessible to more people than ever before. And there's a lot of professional practice things you can do, like learn how to apply for grants, learn how to apply for, like, write a good proposal, develop your CV, but like there's all things, there are practical things you can do to build your career. And I had really devoted myself to doing that. But I just reached a point where I didn't feel that was, there was just something that didn't feel like that was right for me at that time. I just started to have a lot of friction around the idea of making and selling work just for something to go on somebody's wall, and for them to talk about the things that the work was about, but to not actually change anything in the culture, or maybe not even in their lives, other than it looking really good above their couch or something. And so, yeah, I actually quit. I was like, I'm done with this. I don't want to do it. I just felt uninspired. I really felt like, the climate crisis loomed large in my life. I also was just feeling like this sort of intense agitation of all the materials I was using. And yeah, I mean, looking back now, I think I was being like a little bit extreme. But anyway, I was having a reaction to basically all the things that were going on in the world with the environment, and then also just internally, like what is the best form of service to the world that I can offer, like based on my skills and my energy. And so I quit being an artist for a little while, like maybe a year, and I was like contemplating becoming a gardener instead. And
cool.
Yeah, I was like helping out a friend who was like doing landscaping for a few public gardens around New York. And I was like, should I do a horticultural course? And I was really thinking about it. And then I went to this Christmas party, a neighborhood Christmas party up the street. And I was talking with my neighbor, who is the artist, Oliver Herring. And he basically was asking me how my artwork practice was going. And yeah, and I told him that I was kind of done with it. And I was like disillusioned with how artists no longer really impact culture, or not in a way that feels real. It just feels like they're just serving the capitalist model. And he pretty much said to me like the one line that like changed everything, which was, you have to find your own way. He's like, that is your privilege and responsibility as an artist, as anyone who's creative. Like, you can create your own way, and you do that for yourself, and you do that in service of the culture at large.
Wow.
And I was like, he's right. Like, I could just go spend all this energy studying horticulture and doing this. But guess what? I've been training as an artist for the last 7 to 10 years. Where did all that energy go? Like, use it. It's a privilege. Like, not very few people get to do the things that I've done and work in the places that I have. And it was like a spoiled brat moment to be like, I'm just going to throw this all away and do something else. And not that I'm saying this is wrong for anybody else, but
right.
For me, I was like, he's right. Like, I can do something with this. And so Inner Fields was really born out of that. It was like, the question that I was asking myself at that time was like, is there a way to create an artwork that creates the same feeling that I get when people come to these public gardens that I was helping weed and water and just, tend to? And so I was really thinking of this idea of like an inner garden. So my brother runs a tea business called Tea Urchin from China. And the tea tradition in China is like very different from the Western tea tradition. It's very like contemplative. It's like a whole process, there's ceremony involved. And so, yeah, I liked this idea, in the old tea houses, there's often like an inner garden where you go inside the tea hut, and then there'll be like a little inner sanctum, which is open to the sky, but it's like a space for contemplation and tea and communion as well. People come and talk and sit over like one pot of tea for hours. And that was kind of like the impetus for Inner Fields. It was like, I want to create a space. Like, can I make just a space? So it's not a gallery, and it's not it's not a venue. It's not like a performance. It's like, it's just a space, and it can be anything I want at any time, but it must do these particular things, which is cultivate community, like a sense of actual connection, not like, oh, we just came together and sat together in a room and then we all left, but actually create a sense of connectedness, humanness, and have a sense of like contemplation or wisdom. Like, we're not just here to have a nice time. It's not just entertainment. It's like, we're seeking something, and we're connecting through that seeking and that desire to learn and to get closer to what's real. And I guess, yeah, and then it had to be kind of just a non-determined, like a non-predetermined space. Like I could do anything I wanted in it, and it wouldn't have to like fit any kind of like marketable model. Like, so one week it might be some kind of performance, live drawing, like figure drawing event with like a whole installation and music, and then another time it could just be like a qigong class. Another time it could be a tea ceremony. Another time it could just be like a collage night, or like a community dinner, and people just come over and we like can draw or work on any art things that we want to work on. So it was just like basically whatever I wanted. And I was in my home. So, you know, I was like, come to my home and we're going to do this thing. And I don't know, I'm not a teacher. I have these ideas, and this was what would be fun to me. And I would like to be invited to something like this. So if it interests you, come on over and we'll do this thing together. And I think, you know, having it in my home wasn't an on purpose thing. It was that like I couldn't actually afford the kind of space that I wanted. I'd been looking at like these really beautiful warehouse spaces with like beautiful big windows and light and floorboards and all that. And I just couldn't afford them. And a big part of my practice is to always work with what I have. Mm-hmm. It's like kind of my number one creative mantra. It's just like, okay, I want to make this thing. Well, what have I got that I can start it like right now? And so, yeah, my flatmate at that time moved out, and I was like, okay, so her space is empty. It had like a bathroom attached to it. It had its own entryway off the hallway. So it was kind of like a sort of self-contained space. And I was like, there you go. That's what I have. And I was like really embarrassed that it was in my apartment, because I thought it should have been this really nice formal space, but it ended up being the thing people loved the most about it. Yeah. And that's really sort of also how it started to take on a life of its own, and just, you know, like I have these ideas and I can do them, but at the end of the day, yeah, it does have a life of its own, and I'm just sort of following it. It's like, oh, what does the community need? Like, what is the thing that feels most relevant right now? This, okay, so it's really like a call and response type relationship now, and it's been going for 5 years, over 5 years, and I think it's really reaching the time where it's standing on its own two legs. And kind of the way I've been seeing it is like, you know, it's been this little baby that I've had to like feed and clothe and keep alive, and now it's like kind of walking around going, no, I'm my own human, like, or being with my own personality, with my own trajectory. And yeah, so I'm a little bit like, oh, okay, how do I nurture and tend to this, what it wants to be, rather than any idea in my head of like what I thought it was.
It's so interesting to me, just that idea of the way that you're listening to your projects. I liked that you talked about it as a call and response, working with what you have and being adaptable and present with what makes sense. And I love the idea of having it in your space too. I don't know if you ever went to 106 Green in Brooklyn. So it was a friend in New York, and he had a gallery space in his apartment too. And it was mostly like every other month they would just do a different art installation. So it was a little bit of a different approach, but there was just this intimacy and beauty to going into someone's home and being invited there, and of a vulnerability that feels just so special, that you're not just walking into a big warehouse space, you're walking into someone's home. And so there's this reverence for it, and there's a love for it, because when you live there, you're tending to it every day, and there's a relationship to that space, and to share it with other people feels so special, especially through all of these strange times. I'm curious, you were saying it's starting to stand on its own. How is it looking through the pandemic? Like, how is Inner Fields showing up? How are people able to have this community space?
Yeah, well, I mean, there was a moment, I think, like all organizations were kind of like, are we going to make it through this? And, Inner Fields, the whole essence of Inner Fields was getting people together in an intimate setting in person without their phones, without like screens and so, yeah, I mean, we moved on through Zoom like everybody else did.
Mm-hmm.
And, in a way, like I had been out in Australia already for a year and a half because of my dad. So I'd already kind of been a little bit practiced on participating in Inner Fields events remotely. And so, I mean, you spoke about adaptability and change. I mean, if anything, that is the essence of Inner Fields. Like the key philosophy that drove Inner Fields was this, idea of impermanence, which is a very Buddhist concept and also just a very human concept. And again, just drawing on my interest in not just death, but like impermanence isn't just the endings of things, it's also the beginnings of things. And it's just relentless change, basically. It's like things are arising and ceasing all of the time. And so the very like practice of Inner Fields, it doesn't really matter whether it's like a performance or whether it's a drawing night or whether it's a listening event or whatever the thing is, those are just things. But at its heart is like it's always adapting and it's always changing and it's always responding. So, okay, there's a pandemic. We can't meet in person. How do we use the like limitations of the Zoom space as best as we can to create that same sense of intimacy and connection, and being conscious of how other people are using Zoom spaces and where that intimacy isn't being created, and using that like limitation as a creative edge. Like, okay, so what have we got to work with? How do we work with this? And how do we make this like kind of an exciting creative challenge? And that's like, I love that. For me, I just get a real thrill being like, oh, how do we work around this like logistical problem? And amazingly, we've done really well during the pandemic. Like in some kinds of ways, it took a lot of pressure off of us, because I say us because now we're like a collective of 6. And, because we're not paying rent on a space and there's not like the labor of just hosting a space each time for an event, that's like taken a huge financial pressure off of us. Mm-hmm. Well, off of me, because usually I'm like the one funding it. And then in this other kind of funny way, like people have been so appreciative of the spaces that we've been holding online that, we're run entirely on a gift ecology, and which means, we don't set a sliding scale. We don't set any kind of price. We just ask people, we offer each gathering as a gift, and people can offer gifts in return, whether it be financial or other gifts. And people have just given so generously to us in the last year. And it was like the first year that I wasn't running at a financial loss or like seriously out of pocket. And it was a year where everybody was able to, like all the volunteer facilitators were able to be paid, or just, I don't like to use the word paid, because we're, as a gift ecology, we're really trying to step outside of that transactional mindset, but really just like their work uplifted and supported. And, a lot of them have struggled a lot during the pandemic with the loss of job and their own employment and other projects. And so it was such a gift that Inner Fields could then give to them and go, look, it wasn't like we were rolling around in tons of money, but it was just like these little monthly gifts that would just support them and just like pay respects to their work and to their labor and their time and just their love and care for this project. And and then we've just, of course, we've gathered this community from like all over the United States, not just like New York based. And people have shown up regularly. We've been having these study groups. So we kind of transitioned away from sort of the more like the listening and performance things. I did like one trial of that online, but the Zoom audio container is just really hard to work with. And it's not something I'm like completely putting away forever. But for now, I'm just like, you know what, it would require like a lot of technical equipment and stuff to make that work better. But it's like, okay, well, we want to create this sense of intimacy through this very disembodied space. So having like ongoing creative study groups where people meet repeatedly and develop like actual ongoing connections, that's really been like our focus. And cultivating like this true sense of community through like co-learning. There's something very, very bonding about co-learning, because even though these are all people from all different like walks of life and backgrounds and age groups sometimes, and you know, like wisdom is our uniting path basically, and we're all there just like on this path in our own way. We all have different spiritual practices or whatever, but we all meet and we study and we learn and we support each other in each other's learning. And that's like a very powerful way of community building. And I'm really proud of that. I'm really so proud of that. I mean, I feel like that has been a huge support to me in the last year. And it's interesting. Just, it's interesting what happens when you like stop resisting and struggling like with the thing that you think should be happening, you know. And it's something I'm always getting beaten over the head with. It's like I can never learn that lesson enough, you know. I'm like, no, it's got to be this way. It's like doink. Like, it's not that way, so what are you going to do about it? It's like, oh, right. And then that's like where the best creative idea happens, you know. And I mean, in Taoism, that's a lot of it, right? Like, it's a lot about like responding and being like water, like Bruce Lee says, like you follow the course of the path of least resistance is the, you know, the quickest way to the ocean, you know, and just like follow those things.
I love that idea of co-learning, and I can see how it feels empowering for everyone to just be learning together and to be sharing and, you know, kind of giving each other their insights, and instead of like one person like top down just like sharing with each other. That's such a cool idea.
If you start showing up to events, we're doing like mostly repeat events at the moment. So right now we have like the meditation sangha, which is just basically people that want to practice meditation together, and each month is based on a different topic or theme. So we just did one on spiritual friendship this month, and then last month we did one on like interbeing, like through the lessons of mushrooms and mycology, and the month before that it was the sacred feminine. So we kind of explore different themes, but it's all oriented around the practice. And so that happens on the first Monday of each month. And so, if you show up to one of those, you'll kind of get on the list to be invited to the following ones. So we're really trying to invite people that will invest and commit to these collectives, essentially, rather than just like drop in and drop out, which we welcome that too, but the idea is more to get repeat. So we're mostly women of color led. It's a multiracial group, but we're largely women of color. There is one guy, but I mean, so like, I only say that because like feminist leadership is like a really important part of Inner Fields, and just trying to create like, now that we're no longer just me in my apartment doing my own wacky thing, it's like, oh, how do we now use this as a creative edge? Like, how do we build an organization on completely different principles from other organizations? So not this like top heavy approach, not even like from the center radiating outwards, but like, how does the leadership actually be at the bottom and just like support and lead from behind and uplift everybody's work? And so we're exploring those principles. Like, none of us are really trained in this. We're just learning as we go. One of our newest facilitators is studying transformative leadership. And so she's going to offer some internal co-learning just for us. So we model what we do in the community within our organizational structure. So we do our own internal co-learning spaces, and then we also offer other things out. So there's sort of like two things happening all of the time. So right now we're kind of in an internal phase, and we'll kind of be opening up again, I would say, like around April or May. But the Sangha is sort of the spine of Inner Fields. So we really, yeah, want to build that community and have that consistency of practice kind of always carry through. So
so beautiful. I love that idea of having that core of just consciousness kind of help build everything else that comes. And it's such an incredible format and structure. I can see the future of organizations moving more in that direction.
It's super exciting for me. I feel like it's such a like rich creative area, and it's so fun for me as well to collaborate with other people in this way and build something together, because I think I've been like a pretty solo kind of artist, just you know, doing my thing. And Fields has always been collaborative, but I've never like, I mean, I've worked kind of consistently with the same sort of collaborators over the years, but never like so intently in a small organizing group. And that's been a big change that happened because of the pandemic and the fact that, and also before the pandemic, because I wasn't in the country, and my dad, the whole thing with my dad, I just couldn't be like a huge organizing presence. And it was just like such a blessing that there were people in the Sangha that were like, we want to carry this onward, even without you being here to spearhead it. And they spearheaded it. And then in that way, it led to like this new organizational structure forming, where it was like, yeah, it should be decentralized. There's no longevity or sustainability in one person carrying the weight of all of these things. I mean, and yeah, creatively, that's also the richest place, right? Like in collaboration and all these different ideas. And, you know, not all of us are artists. Some of us are scholars or educators, or, you know, just we all have different ways of thinking and doing things. And when you bring them all together, something really magic happens, especially when it's unified around, you know, an ethos of wisdom and compassion and processes of care. So yeah, that's sort of our creative experiment.
I love the idea of your recent class too, with friendship focused around spirituality. I'm curious if there's any little gems you want to mention about that idea.
So we've been running the Sangha for about 5 years, but we had started it again because we felt like we needed to change our languaging and be more explicit and clear, particularly explicit forms of white supremacy and racism that have been happening across the US in the last 4 years. We felt it became clear that it was necessary to also be more explicit about what we were doing. So, you know, I've tended to always invite my collaborators to be Black, Indigenous, or people of color. Like I've always those are just tend to be the people in my community and people I prefer to collaborate with. That it hasn't always been that way, but it's been largely the case. But I would never say that when we used to host things in person. People would just see the names, and that would be a signal that, you know, it would be like diverse leadership. So it would tend to attract a diverse audience or crowd. And when we moved online during the pandemic, that changed really quickly for some reason. Maybe it was because of like the Black Lives Matter uprisings that like more white folks were like interested in supporting BIPOC-led spaces. But we found that like all of a sudden our spaces were largely filled with just white people and not as diverse as it was before. And so it became, again, a thing where we had to respond and be like, okay, there were particular reasons why I wasn't labeling us and using that kind of language, even though that's what we were doing. But it just became time to be like, you know what, there's a reason why we need to use this language right now and be very explicit and clear about allegiance to social justice, basically. So the Sangha, all of long-winded way of just saying, so the Sangha basically took a pause and then we regrouped, and we're now like created a new Sangha, which just started in this last month. So the topics that we've been exploring are like topics that each of us, we each take turns as facilitators to host a session. And it's the topics that we feel are reflections of inner fields and kind of like our creative way, again, of explaining what inner fields is without having to do like a whole marketing thing, but actually just come in, to our space, study this thing with us, and then you'll start to get a sense of like all the philosophies and themes that we explore. So spiritual friendship was one that I felt like that was my week to facilitate. So that my month to facilitate. So I chose that topic because actually spiritual friendship is the organizing principle in which I am really trying to establish as the base ground of how we build this new inner fields. And it's like, what does that even mean? How do we do that? Like, are we a cult? Like, are we just like, be friends with us if you want to organize with us? And it's like, no, what is spiritual friendship? Like, what makes it unique from other forms of relationship? And for me, I know what makes it unique. It's not that it's necessarily these idealized friendships where, you know, you are just surrounded by wisdom all of the time and you're just soaking in love and strawberries or something. It's like actually it's rough, and we are going to some of the roughest and emotional places sometimes, and unskillful places sometimes, triggering places, traumatic places, and we're doing it together. And we're not offering each other answers, but we're accompanying each other. And sometimes, like the harrowing part about spiritual friendship, it's almost like family in a way, because you sometimes wield some of the, you know, for all our intents and purposes in trying to create like non-oppressive spaces, you know, we're not all decolonized yet from those things. And so sometimes we wield some of our own, you know, supremacies against ourselves and against others in the group that we love and that we're trying to do everything we can not to do. And that has been like a huge, awful lesson to learn, like in the last year, to witness those moments where that has happened, where actually we inevitably cause harm to each other, inadvertently cause harm to each other, and to acknowledge that and heal from that as best as we can, and yet still work together. Like that's the part that gets me, that like we can go through these periods of fracture and fear and deep insecurity with each other. Like, do we even belong here? Is this a space that like I thought it was, but maybe it's not? And yet we still return because all of us know that the direction is the same. We can't say we're going to be there straight away. Like, you know, this is bigger than us. This is bigger than like our heart's intentions. This is like thousands of years and, you know, hundreds of years of like colonization and all these other things like trauma and, you know, so it's like, okay, there's a little bit of impartiality involved with it, where we harm each other and we try and see it in terms that are like bigger than us, and we continue to work together and try and heal and maintain those bonds and support each other in each other's healing, even in those moments where it's like unskillful, and recognize that it will happen again. Like it's not just like a one-off thing. And that's been really, really hard for me. I mean, I hate conflict.
Me too.
And I'm super conflict avoidant, and it's not good when you're in a leadership role. And, you know, I don't even want to be a leader. I like following people. I like just being like, it's funny because I don't like being told what to do, but if I like trust what you're saying, like I'm just very happy for you to make the decision. But so, yeah, it's become a thing where it's like, oh, it's not okay to sit back and not hold yourself accountable to the power that you hold in a room. Even if it's like seems like a nothing kind of power, it's still power. There are these power dynamics playing out all the time. And so, yeah, these are all things that are part of spiritual friendship. And yeah, it's like a very special kind of relationship. And I wonder, can it be an organizing principle? And that's kind of like one of our goals, is to try and make it sort of the like, yeah, the essence of our relational practice in the internal core level at Inner Fields. And so then if we have that, then what gets offered out will just ripple out to the people that come. That's sort of the idea. But again, it's an experiment where we're doing it as we go and learning as we go.
That's incredible. to go through that journey of rupture and repair.
I think the thing I'm learning right now as well is that sometimes you can't repair something, and that's so painful. Like, that's what I mean by it being bigger than us. Like, sometimes it will just be, it's irreparable. You just can't. And can you stay with that discomfort? And can you still work together? And can you still love and sorry, that's my buzzer. Great timing. Yeah, so it's like, we still care and still have compassion for each other, even in those periods where we can't repair it. Like, and that's like the hardest. It's very, very hard. Like, sometimes you feel all your wounds and all your most triggered feelings are spiking, and you have to see beyond that and go, but I can see this relationship is bigger than that in a way. And I'm sure sometimes it's not going to work like that. Maybe sometimes it will just be unbearable. But so far there is something. I mean, we've been working together, particularly the Sangha collective has been working together for 5 years now. That's like a long time to stay with each other. Yeah. And kind of ride all those waves through a crazy administration, no less, and a pandemic, and family deaths and all kinds of things. We've ridden a lot of waves together. That's like not something you want to throw away easily.
Definitely not. That's incredible. Well, I want to honor your time. I love your paintings. They're so beautiful. They're just like heart-wrenchingly gorgeous. So I don't know if we can talk about your work and your approach to building your paintings, and maybe a little bit about your work with printmaking in the past too. I'm curious how you approach the composition. And then I know you're also working with earth-based materials. I'm wondering how you source those materials and just what that process is like to create a painting. How do you start and how do you get to a finished place?
Yeah, so the compass paintings came about because for like many years I've been very interested in like mapping and mapping symbols, and I was doing like this whole series of like maps of the ocean and like removing all the landforms, so it was just like the earth represented as just bodies of water mapped to certain coastlines. And then basically when I started using natural pigments and like basically collecting my own rocks and minerals and crushing them and turning them into paints, I kind of was like, I wasn't sure of a way to use them that like really got myself out of the way. And so the compasses were kind of my way of going, I want to point just to the earth herself. And so like, and they kind of work because they sort of look like mandalas as well. And they kind of have these, the circle form is very like soothing. But the idea is that, it's just very simple. They're like a compass not pointing to any particular direction, but to the body of the earth herself. And they're painted entirely with that physical presence of the earth. So I guess when I'm painting them, like I'll often start with a certain set of colors that I'm particularly just like a mood or a feeling that I'm going for. So it'll be like a certain like palette of colors that I'm going for. And then I don't know. Again, it's that call and response thing. Like it's not even like I sit there and I map out all the colors. It'll be more just like a certain, maybe 1 or 2 colors will be calling to me, or like it'll be a new paint that I just made that I want to use. And so I'll just start there. I'll draw a whole sort of design first. And then I'll just start somewhere. Like it's kind of an intuitive process. I'll just start somewhere and then follow it and be like, what color wants to go next to it, or what needs to be over there. And I don't work in any particular order. I just make my way around, and I just keep going until it feels like it's complete. And sometimes that means like not every single panel is filled out. Sometimes it means that all panels are filled out. Sometimes it means I have to paint over something I've done before. Yeah, it's sort of like a laborious process of just watching, responding, stepping back. They're quite large too, so I'll tend to hang them up and like live around them for a few months, or I'll travel with them. I'll roll them up, and wherever I go, I take them with me and stick them up, just because in different lights, the pigments will do different things, and I'll have different, like the feelings will evolve from like when I first started it. So then that kind of comes into it as well. So yeah, I don't know. It's sort of just like an intuitive response, but in a way they're like very simple. They're just like geometric circular compositions that have, I mean, I try and aim for them to have sort of a radiating quality, to almost like, you know, like a little temple to the soil and the clay and the rocks, and, you know, and I'm not using particularly necessarily like the most special rocks in the world. Like, you know, sometimes they're just street side rocks, or rocks I found in the harbor or at the beach, or some of them have like more precious or like long histories, and then I'll try and talk about those once the piece is finished. But it's really just about the unifying aspects of earth, and that we all came from those same minerals and rocks, that those things support us all of the time and create life and beauty and color and all of that sort of thing.
I'm curious, you had done a residency at the Kala Art Institute. I'm curious just what that experience has been like, kind of going to a new place to make work, and if you have any suggestions for other people to kind of get out of their maybe old patterns of doing things and trying things in a new way.
Yeah, I love residencies. I mean, that's like, residencies and retreats are like my two most favorite times, I feel like. I mean, it maybe just suits my disposition and my energy, and maybe it's not for everyone. Like, but for me, I work really well when there's like change, to just figure out what you're going to take with you. Either like you already have a body of work in mind, or sometimes like when you apply for a residency, they want you to work on a particular proposal that you've offered them. So you kind of just work with that. But yeah, I mean, there are all kinds of residencies out there. Like, you can apply for ones where they fund you and they house you, or you can apply for ones where you have to pay a little bit and you get just studio access. I've done all different types, and yeah, I really treat them kind of like the way I treat like a retreat experience. Like, you're really just giving yourself over to your creative process. And I did a residency a couple of years ago now at this place called Balderson Press out in the bush in Melbourne, Australia. And that time was just so heavenly. I mean, just to be like somewhere remote, away from people, and just be immersed in nature, and with a studio and a little like place to like make food and sleep, and yeah, just be fully immersed in that without any distractions. I don't know, for me, I just flourish so much. Yeah. And yeah, I mean, solitude is like a big part of my art practice, and which I think then helps me do inner fields, which is like all about connection and relationality. And yeah, they're kind of like the two extremes. So I need them both to balance each other out. I'm like actually largely introverted, and it's very easy for me to be alone and kind of spiral away into my own little world. But it's a growing up thing for me to like come out into a more relational, dynamic field where there's less control. but yeah, the Kalar Art Institute one, that was a long time ago. That was when the reason why that one was so important to me was that's really how I moved to America, because, you know, I didn't have any work visa or anything at that time. And I didn't even really know what I was doing. I mean, it's funny because I remember telling my friends that I was just going to go for maybe a year or two, but they were like, no, when you left, you said you weren't ever coming back. And, you know, like 10 years later. So, but yeah, so the Kalar Art Institute thing, I just applied for it because I was interested in working in the Bay Area, and I was interested in living there for a while. So I wanted to do like a long residency. That one, I think the initial one was like 6 months, and then I did a second one there. So it ended up being a full year at Kalar. And I initially went over there. So a really amazing philanthropic body here in Australia funded that trip, because I wanted to learn some processes that you couldn't learn in Australia, namely like a particular type of photogravure and a digital shinkalay. I don't know if you know about
I love shinkalay. Yeah, I went to school for printmaking too. So I
And that's like my favorite thing is like intaglio, like layering intaglio, shinkale. And yeah, oh my God, so fun.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I wanted to like learn, you know, because printmaking in Australia, as I had experienced it, felt just very traditional, which was very good. Like I love learning like the very traditional, long studied craft, and then like see what you can do with that. Like once you've got that. So yeah, the digital shinkale was like interesting because it was incorporating digital imagery onto like shinkale papers and then applying that with like a very traditional. So Kala kind of focused, I don't know if that's what they're doing now, but at that time I remember their printmaking studio was very much about marrying these very traditional processes with these more digital and contemporary making. And so yeah, I went there pretty much to study that. But yeah, more just like living in the Bay Area for a year really just changed my whole life. Like it was it's such a unique part of the world. And the sense of community there is just so strong, particularly like I was living out in East Oakland, and just like the way people prioritize community and like understand that community is a survival tactic was just had a really profound impact on me, and something I had always felt, but I really felt it to be true once I experienced it there.
Yeah.
And that kind of set me on like a whole new trajectory. So yeah.
I love just hearing about your journey. I'm curious, is there anything else coming to the surface that you want to be sure to share that you think might be helpful for listeners as they're exploring their own communities and trying to make work in different ways?
Well, I think the word community is something we could all be thinking about, or not just thinking about anymore, but enacting. And, you know, that word gets used a lot in all kinds of ways, often to sell us something. And I'm right now, with the way things are falling apart and the way things are becoming more polarized, and like community is so important. Like it is a survival tactic. And so I don't know, I just really like encourage people that feel like they've ever longed for a sense of community to build your own. Like do it yourself. Don't stop waiting for it to come to you. It's something that, yeah, you need to prioritize in your life. And even if you start really, really small, I mean, I can't tell you how to do it, but like, yeah, be creative with it. Like think about the people who you'd want to be in community with, who you would want to support, and who you'd like to be supported by. And yeah, really commit to that, because it's much needed. And it's actually like, it's not just like a sweet, cute thing to do on a Saturday night. It's actually like a countering force to the way of individualization and separation that this culture really wields over us. And so every time you're doing anything that is like collaborative or cooperative and like ongoing, you're basically countering that force, I think, in its own little unheroic way. And if all of us are doing this and we're all learning and growing and like moving towards like wiser, more skillful, beneficial, less harmful paths, like it's going to make a difference. So that's kind of my preachy, sanctimonious little thing. I'm just like, build community, please build community amongst your own people, and learn from each other and change each other and grow together. And yeah, I think we'll all, yeah. Anyway, that's it.
I love your high horse. That's so powerful and so good. And I can just feel how important and revolutionary that is. Like if you're not alone, you know, when we're not alone and we're working together, like we can start to really transform things for the better. And it just feels good in your soul to not be alone too. So
yeah, exactly. I mean, yeah, I'm just like so passionate about it. And I like, and maybe my passion clouds my view, but I do feel like it's the truth. It's like we cannot create change unless we work together. And I'm imagining that the people listening to your podcast are people that are already doing like a lot of inner work and contemplative work. And sometimes that does require periods of solitude or just a practice that you're doing on your own. But I don't know, this time that we're living in is so unique and special, and we are being asked to do a new thing, and that new thing is to come back together. And this is not something it's not something that's new. It's something like Indigenous communities have always known and done, which is why they've survived for so long. But those of us who have grown up in this very like toxic capitalistic model, we haven't had that as easily. And beyond the like nuclear family, or maybe the extended family if you're lucky, like we haven't felt like a place of belonging in a larger community. And maybe the friendship group counts, and that's great if you have that, but just it's a slightly different thing, I think, when you're working together on something. And even if that thing feels really tiny and like inconsequential in the world, I feel like it's not. I feel like it's like you're putting your mind stream or your energetic stream or whatever you want to call it into like a different current that is actually a current that's like, I'm not the only one doing it. A lot of different people are entering that current right now. And this time is really calling for that. And so it's kind of our responsibility, I think, to step up to that for the sake of the planet and each other. So,
yeah. Oh my God. I love that. Thank you, Elaine. How can people connect with you? How can they know what you're up to?
So I just made a new website for me. It's my first time having my own website in like maybe 15 years. So it's just elainesuhui.com, ELAINESUHUI.com. And then you can sign up for my newsletter, which I've never sent out a newsletter yet, but I will soon. And, and then of course there's like Instagram, social media stuff. Innerfields is on there. Follow Innerfields on social media, which is just Innerfields and then _NY, Innerfields _ New York, NY. And and then once the new Innerfields website comes out, you'll know through some channel. You'll find out. Google us and you'll find out. But,
Beautiful. Yeah, I will definitely have those links in the show notes. Well, thank you so much for making this time. It's been absolutely wonderful to just be able to sit with you and have this time together and to see your beautiful Australian kitchen and your potatoes are roasting away.
Yeah, that's right. Hopefully they didn't get burnt. I don't think so. They were on the edge. But thank you so much for this time. It was like a pleasure to meet you and talk to you. And I wish you all the best with all your explorations. And I love the podcast. Podcasts are my favorite form of like gathering information and
conversations. They're so fun. Like I just learned so much from them, and it's just fun it's exciting to see where things go.
Yeah, a seed is always good, to start with. You never know what could happen. Cool. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a beautiful night.
All right, will do.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks so much for being here. I hope you enjoyed that conversation. Please be sure to connect with Elaine on Instagram at Elaine Su-Hui. You can also check out her gorgeous website. And you can find Innerfields on Instagram as well, Innerfields New York, and connect with me at Thyme in the Studio podcast. And a big thank you also to Aaron Travers for the intro and outro music. You can find him on Instagram, AA Travers. And thank you so much for being here. A big shout out to my patrons at Patreon. You can sign up there. I do oftentimes extended versions of the conversations and free little handouts and little thingamajiggers. So you can sign up there, and it's really wonderful, and I'm very grateful for my patrons. And you can sign up for my newsletter if you'd like. I send that out once or twice a month, and usually do like a recipe or a playlist or something fun. So that's at thymeinthestudio.com. I hope you're well, and I'm excited to be launching a couple new products to support you in the coming weeks. So yeah, keep an eye out for that. Please be sure to subscribe, and if you want to leave a rating or review, that's fun and greatly appreciated. Take care, and may our efforts benefit all beings. Toodaloo!